My husband cheated on me with my best friend. I found out while 6 months pregnant with our third child. But that's not even the part that haunts me most. What truly shatters me isn't the betrayal. It's the fact that they smiled in my face, held my children in their arms, while lying to me for months. It's the look in his eyes the day after I discovered everything. The ease, the normalcy. Like he hadn't just torn my world apart. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the version of me who still believed that love, loyalty, and forever were real, to the woman who never saw it coming. If you're new here and this story has gripped you even a little, please subscribe to the channel so we can keep sharing stories like this. Your support keeps this space alive. Now, let's begin. I was 19 when I met Logan. He was 22 and had just returned from a volunteer firefighter deployment in Colorado. I was a nursing student at UNC Asheville, eyes full of dreams, lungs full of laughter, heart still untouched by grief. He was tall, not in the intimidating way, but in the way that made you feel protected. He had calloused hands and soft eyes, this fascinating contradiction between strength and gentleness. We met at a campus bonfire. He offered me his hoodie when I was shivering, and then sat next to me like he wasn't trying to impress me, like he simply belonged there. Next to me, I'd never felt so seen. Within 6 months, we were inseparable. Within 2 years, married. Everyone said we were rushing it. But when you know, or at least I thought I did. We got married at a vineyard in Blowing Rock. The air smelled like lavender and wet earth. My best friend Ava stood by my side as my maid of honor, crying harder than I did. She was radiant that day, clapping the loudest when we kissed. She whispered to me afterward, "You got your forever. I'm so proud of you." She was wrong. Logan and I built a quiet, beautiful life together. We bought a house just outside Asheville with a wraparound porch and room for kids to grow wild and messy. We hosted game nights, grilled on Sundays, shared chores. He made me coffee every morning, just how I liked it. Extra cream, no sugar. We had 2 kids within 5 years. 1 boy, 1 girl. And just as life felt steady, we found out I was pregnant with our third. That's when everything else began to fall apart. My father, who had practically raised me after my mom died when I was 12, was diagnosed with stage 3 colon cancer. I don't think there are words to describe the sound a heart makes when it cracks down the middle. He was more than a parent. He was my compass, my protector, my constant. I spent every free moment with him. He'd lost weight, forgotten things. Once, he forgot the name of our family dog, a dog he had gifted me. I watched the brightness drain from his eyes day by day. It felt like I was watching the sun die. Logan was supportive, on the surface. He encouraged me to quit my job to care for Dad. He told me I was doing the right thing. He smiled and kissed my forehead, and I believed him. Every single word. Ava stepped in like the best friend everyone dreams of having. She took the kids when I couldn't. She brought casseroles and wine. She even helped with Dad's hospice setup. She grieved with me like it was her own father. "I've got you," she said. Always. My pregnancy progressed. I tried to hold it all together, be a good mom, a good daughter, a good wife. I smiled for my kids, played hide and seek, read bedtime stories with a lump in my throat. At night, I cried in the shower where no one could hear me. But I never stopped loving Logan, never stopped trusting him. Why would I? He never gave me a reason. No late nights, no suspicious texts, no sudden changes in behavior. He was still the man who made me tea with honey when I had heartburn, who rubbed my feet when they swelled. If anything, he was more attentive than usual. Now I know why. The guilt. Ava and I had been friends since we were toddlers. Her mother, Ruth, and my mom had grown up together. We had matching friendship bracelets from 3rd grade and a pact that we'd raise our kids together someday. And we were doing it. Our kids called each other cousins. She was at every birthday, every barbecue, every milestone. She was in my delivery room when I had my daughter. And yet, behind closed doors, she was stealing the one thing I thought was safe, the one person I thought would never hurt me. There was a night, maybe a month before it all came crashing down, when she came over with wine. I was tired, emotionally spent, and she insisted we have a girls' night in after the kids were asleep. I remember thanking her for being there. I remember saying, "I honestly don't know what I'd do without you." She looked me in the eye and said, "I'll never leave you." I want to scream when I think about that night. To this day, I replay every moment, wondering how I didn't see it, how I didn't sense the shift, how I didn't notice her hugs lingered a second too long when Logan was in the room, or how he seemed more relaxed around her than he did around me. But I didn't. Because when you love deeply, you don't look for betrayal. You see what you want to see. I thought I had everything. A growing family. A marriage built on trust. A best friend who was family. It was all a lie. But before I discovered the truth, before that one text cracked my reality in half, I lived in the warmth of that lie. And that's what makes it so cruel. Because betrayal doesn't begin with a storm, it begins with a calm. A deep, disarming calm that lulls you into believing you are safe. That's how it creeps in. That's how it wins. I didn't know it yet, but I was already at war, and I was about to lose everything I thought I knew about love. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. Please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps us keep telling stories that matter, and it shows us that people still care about the truth. Before we dive into part 2 of this journey, I have a question for you. Question: if you saw a suspicious message on your partner's phone, what would you do? A. Confront them immediately, no matter the timing. Wait. Collect more proof and stay quiet for now. Drop your answer in the comments, A or B, and let us know why. Your thoughts help shape our next videos. I didn't plan to see the message. In fact, I wish I never had. It was a Wednesday morning, the kind that begins too early and too slowly. My son had a fever overnight and crawled into bed with me around 3 in the morning. Logan's alarm went off at 6, and the familiar chime felt like an intrusion, slicing through the fragile quiet I'd been clinging to. I groaned, reached over his sleeping body, and silenced the alarm. Then I gently nudged him. "You're late," I whispered. He stirred and mumbled, called out. Was up working late. That didn't seem strange. He occasionally handled late-night logistics for his construction business. He kissed my shoulder, turned over, and slipped back into sleep. I let myself relax. The morning light hadn't quite reached the corners of our bedroom. The baby fluttered low in my belly, as if reminding me of the day ahead. I had made plans to take my dad to a new palliative care appointment. Another round of decisions, of pretending I was okay. I rolled to the edge of the bed, reaching for his phone so I could shut off the second alarm that was scheduled to go off in 5 minutes. I wasn't snooping, I wasn't suspicious, I was just tired, and trying to keep the house quiet. That's when I saw it. A single message, bright and mocking, sitting at the top of his lock screen. From Ava. I'm assuming since there hasn't been an angry pregnant lady on my doorstep, you haven't told her about us yet. The room didn't spin. It didn't explode. It fell completely still. I don't remember unlocking the phone. I don't remember breathing, but I remember standing in the hallway an hour later, barefoot on the hardwood, the phone clenched in my hand so tightly my knuckles were white. 4 months. They'd been sleeping together for 4 months. It started just after my father's diagnosis. worsened, while I was busy helping him prepare for the end of his life, while I was crying on Ava's shoulder. While I was carrying our third child, I read every word, every lie, every plan they made to meet at cheap motels or during his sight checks, every disgusting message, every joke at my expense. I don't think she suspects a thing. He'd written. She's so caught up in her dad, I doubt she even knows what day it is, she replied. They weren't just having an affair, they were mocking me, dismissing my grief as a convenience, laughing at my trust, exploiting the chaos of my world to build their own. I sat down on the edge of the bathtub and didn't cry. That surprised me. I'd always thought this kind of betrayal would come with fireworks of pain. Instead, there was only a deep, cold quiet inside me. I stayed there for nearly 2 hours. At some point, Logan woke up, called out for me. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I was too afraid of what my voice might sound like. He had kissed me goodnight just hours earlier. Ava had texted him 5 minutes later. Do you think she'd still fight for you if she knew? Or would she finally let go? I don't remember what I did next. Not exactly. I remember walking into our bedroom. I remember seeing his sleeping face and wondering how long it had been since I'd actually looked at him. Not as my husband, but as a man. How long had he been lying to me with that mouth that kissed our kids goodnight? I walked past him and took the kids into the kitchen. I made breakfast. I packed snacks. I helped my daughter put on her shoes. I dressed my son and wiped his nose. I played the part of a mother who wasn't slowly bleeding on the inside. He joined us eventually. He kissed my forehead and told me to be safe driving to my dad's. He even offered to bring dinner home that night. I said nothing. Not yet. I needed time. One more day. Just one day to let the world stay still before I burned it to the ground. That night, I lay in bed beside him, pretending to sleep, pretending my heart wasn't screaming. Every time he moved, I flinched. Not from fear, but from rage, from the knowledge that the man beside me could look me in the eye and say he loved me and mean none of it. At one point, he turned toward me and placed his hand on my belly. The baby kicked against his palm. He smiled. I had to bite my lip to keep from crying out. The next morning, I called my lawyer. I didn't have a plan yet, not fully, but I knew I needed protection. I needed options. I needed clarity. Because the one thing I couldn't afford was to let my emotions destroy my children's lives. I made a list. I printed the texts. I recorded timelines. I filed them into a folder. I labeled it Exit Strategy. I called Ava's mother, Ruth. I didn't tell her over the phone. I just asked her to meet me. I did the same with Renee, my mother-in-law. There was a dull ache in my chest when I thought about them. These women had raised us. They'd been at every milestone of my life. And now, they would witness the worst betrayal of it. That afternoon, Ava called me. I didn't answer. She texted, "Hey, thinking about you. Let me know how your dad's appointment went." I stared at the screen until her name blurred. The audacity, the sheer cruelty, to hold space for my pain in one hand while destroying my family with the other. I didn't reply. Not then. Not ever again. I blocked her number and saved the messages for evidence. Later that night, I sat outside with my father. He was having a good day, one of the rare ones. He was lucid. He joked about the banana pudding Renee had dropped off. He asked about the baby. He looked at me and said, "You look tired, sweetheart, but still strong." I nearly broke then, but I didn't, because I knew the next 24 hours would change everything. When I kissed him goodnight, he pulled me close and whispered, "Whatever it is, you'll get through it." You always do." And in that moment, I believed him. Because when everything else fell apart, my father's belief in me was the only truth I had left. The next morning, I woke up to Logan making pancakes with the kids. He looked so normal, so good. He kissed the top of my head and asked if I wanted coffee. Looked at him and thought, "You have no idea who I am anymore, do you?" You see, betrayal doesn't always feel like fire. Sometimes it feels like ice, cold, still, silent, until it breaks and drowns everything in its path. And I was done drowning. The countdown had started, and I would never be the same. Some storms don't come with thunder. They arrive in silence, unseen, unspoken, until they finally shatter everything. The day I confronted Logan and Ava didn't begin with fury. It began with precision. I had spent the night preparing the pieces, meticulously, printing every text message, highlighting timelines, categorizing evidence. There was nothing impulsive about what I was going to do. Emotionally, I was past the shock, past the rage. What remained was something colder, methodical, necessary, a kind of quiet power I didn't know I had. I dropped the kids off with Ruth, my mother-in-law. She didn't ask why I needed the day. She simply kissed my forehead and told me to take all the time I needed. I think a part of her already knew something was wrong. Mother's intuition, maybe. Or maybe she'd seen the way Logan had changed but didn't want to believe it. I sent a message to Ava's parents, Angie and Thomas, asking if they could meet me that afternoon at my father's house. I told them it was urgent, personal, important. I sent the same message to Renee, Logan's mom. No one questioned it. They all arrived around 4. It was a strange sight. These people who had been at my wedding, who had sat at the same Thanksgiving table year after year, who had watched our children grow up side by side. They came expecting a family meeting. Maybe something about Dad's hospice plan. Maybe something about the baby. They didn't expect what was waiting for them. I handed out envelopes, thick, heavy with proof. I told them not to speak until they'd read everything inside. No one moved for several minutes. Then the sound of paper rustling filled the room, like dry leaves being blown through an empty street. Angie was the first to react. Her hands trembled as she turned to look at me, horror painting her face. She didn't speak, just shook her head slowly, as if refusing to believe what she was seeing. Renee went pale, her lips pressed into a tight line. Thomas stood frozen, eyes locked on a printout of a message from his daughter that read, "She's too busy crying over her dying dad to notice anything." Renee whispered, This isn't real. It can't be." I didn't respond. I didn't have to. The proof was undeniable. When Ava and Logan arrived, I almost admired their composure. They thought this was a family check-in. They walked in holding cups of coffee, Ava smiling like she hadn't just detonated my life. Logan kissed me on the cheek. The moment their eyes landed on the open folders in everyone's hands, everything changed. Logan froze. Ava's face drained of color. No one spoke for a long moment. Then Angie stood. "I want to hear it from you," she said, her voice shaking. "Is it true?" Ava opened her mouth to lie. I could see it in her eyes. She reached for her mother's hand, but Angie recoiled like her touch had burned her. "Don't," Angie said sharply. "Don't make this worse by lying. It was a mistake," Ava stammered. "It just happened." Logan stepped forward, trying to take control of the situation. "Hannah, we should talk about this privately." That was the last straw. "No," I said. "You don't get to make this private. You brought our betrayal into every corner of this family. You let her touch my children. You let her tuck them in at night. You stood next to me and held my hand while my father was dying. And all the while, you were sleeping with her." Logan had no defense. He just stood there, eyes hollow. Renee stood up, her voice quiet but firm. I don't know who you are anymore. You're not the man I raised. You're not the father my grandchildren deserve. You're overreacting, Logan said. We can work through this. I laughed then, not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd, so far removed from reality, that I couldn't believe he actually thought we could recover from this. No, Logan, we can't. I already spoke with a lawyer. You will be served. I'm filing for divorce. He didn't argue. He just stared at the floor, defeated. But Ava was the one who unraveled. You're going to throw away your whole marriage over a few mistakes? She cried. You were never just a mistake, Ava, I said. You were my best friend. You were my family. You were supposed to be there for me, not stealing the only person I had left. She lunged forward, like she was going to grab my hand, but Angie stepped between us. No, her mother said. You've done enough. The next 30 minutes were a blur of chaos. Ava crying, Logan refusing to make eye contact, Renee and Angie consoling each other in silence, Thomas walking outside, too angry to speak. I watched them all from across the room, holding my belly, feeling the baby shift inside me, anchoring me to something real, something innocent. Eventually, Logan left. Ava followed. They didn't speak to each other. Whatever illusion they had, built together, had cracked. Without the secrecy, without the thrill of the forbidden, there was nothing left between them. Just shame. When the door closed behind them, Angie sat beside me and took my hand. I am so sorry, she said through tears. You were more of a daughter to me than she ever was. And then she handed me something unexpected. Her will. She and Thomas had removed Ava entirely. Everything they owned, every asset, every future plan, they had redirected it to my children. She betrayed our entire family, she said. We're not going to pretend like she didn't. I cried then, not for Logan, not even for Ava, but for the girl I had once been, the girl who believed that love could last forever. That loyalty meant something. That family was unbreakable. That night, I moved in with my father full-time. I brought the kids. We set up their rooms with new bedding, new toys, new nightlights. I explained that Daddy was going to be away for a while. They didn't ask many questions. Kids are perceptive. They knew something was wrong, but I promised them we would be okay. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window in my father's living room, watching the wind shift the trees. I thought about what Ava had said, about mistakes, about forgiveness. But what neither she nor Logan seemed to understand was this. Forgiveness isn't the absence of anger. It's the presence of dignity, and I would not let them strip me of mine. In the morning, my lawyer called. She had everything she needed to move forward. Dissolution instead of divorce if Logan cooperated. It would be faster, cleaner. She assured me he had no legal access to my inheritance, no stake in my father's estate, and that we would seek full custody. She asked me if I wanted to pursue spousal support. I declined. I didn't want his money. I just wanted him gone. Later that day, I took the kids to the park. The sun was warm. The air smelled like spring. My son pushed his sister on the swing while I sat on a bench, my hand on my belly, whispering to the child growing inside me. I told the baby about strength, about resilience, about how sometimes you don't get to choose the storms, but you do get to choose how you walk through them. I didn't know what lay ahead. I didn't know how hard it would get. But for the first time in weeks, I felt still. Not empty. Not broken. Just still. And that was enough to keep going. The days after the confrontation felt strangely weightless, like I was floating through a version of my life that no longer belonged to me. I had expected chaos, expected grief to wrap itself around me and strangle everything. But instead, I was functional, sharp, focused. Grief had turned into momentum, and momentum was the only thing keeping me standing. I moved through the motions, like someone preparing for a war she never asked to fight. Phone calls, documents, appointments. I met with my lawyer every other day, bringing her everything I had: bank statements, investment portfolios, Logan's business paperwork, even the safe deposit records that contained the wills from both my parents. She was impressed with how thorough I had been, but this wasn't about efficiency. This was about survival. Logan hadn't contacted me since the day I confronted him. He hadn't apologized, hadn't begged. Maybe he knew it was pointless. Or maybe the reality of what he'd done hadn't sunk in yet. What I hadn't expected, however, was Ava's silence. At first. 3 days after the confrontation, she began texting me. The first message was surprisingly soft. "I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I miss you." I didn't reply. The next day, her tone shifted. "You don't have to punish me forever. I was going through something too." Still, I didn't reply. Then came the rage. "You think you're so perfect. You think you can just cut me off like I never mattered. I hope your baby looks just like Logan, so you never forget what you lost." By the 5th day, I had over 70 messages from her, some sent at 3 or 4 in the morning. I screenshot everything and sent them to my attorney. She advised me not to block Ava just yet. Sometimes people say things in anger that become useful in court. That didn't make it easier to read, but it did give me clarity. Ava wasn't just ashamed. She was unraveling, and I wasn't going to let her drag me down with her. Meanwhile, Logan started showing cracks too. His silence broke. The day he came home to find most of the furniture gone and our children's bedrooms empty. He had been served the dissolution papers earlier that morning, and I guess it hit him all at once. How real this was. There were cameras installed throughout our house, standard nanny cams for the kids. I watched the footage later, sitting on the couch at my dad's place, a blanket over my belly and my hands trembling slightly. He walked through the house, quiet at first. Then he started shouting. Not words, just raw, guttural noise. He flipped chairs, smashed a photo frame that had a picture of all 5 of us at the beach. I saw him sink to the floor in the living room, holding his head. And for a second, I almost pitied him, but that feeling passed quickly. Because when he realized we weren't there, he didn't call me. He drove to my father's house and tried to break the door down with a baseball bat. My father wasn't home at the time. He was at the hospice, sent her for a consultation. But the neighbor across the street saw everything and called the police. Logan was arrested on the spot. No one posted bail. Not even his parents. That was the turning point for me. Up until then, I had told myself that maybe, just maybe, we could co-parent civilly. That maybe, with boundaries and therapy, the kids could still have both parents in their lives. But that night changed everything, because my children would never be safe with someone who used violence as an answer to pain. I told my lawyer I wanted full custody. The emotional toll of those weeks began to manifest physically. I wasn't sleeping. My pregnancy was progressing, and the baby was healthy, but I was running on fumes. Every day brought new legal developments, new arrangements, new threats. Ava tried to pick my son up from school one afternoon. Thankfully, the school had been alerted about the situation and had strict instructions to deny access to anyone not listed on the approved guardian list. They called me immediately. Ava fled before the police arrived, but that incident was enough for my lawyer to file an emergency protective order. Still, even through the chaos, I began to notice small pockets of peace, little things. My daughter learning how to tie her shoes on her own. My son asking to read the bedtime story instead of having it read to him. My father having one full conversation with me where he didn't forget where he was or who I was. And Dylan, Ava's older brother, Dylan, had stepped in quietly but powerfully. He was a former Navy mechanic, home on leave, and had offered to help me move the rest of my things out of the old house. I hadn't seen much of him since we were teenagers. Back then, he was quiet, serious, always tinkering with old cars or taking things apart to see how they worked. He showed up one morning with a truck and an easy smile. He didn't ask questions, didn't press. He just loaded boxes, packed toys, and helped me disassemble the crib. Later that night, after the kids went to sleep, we sat on the back porch of my dad's house. He handed me a cup of chamomile tea and stared out at the mountains. "I used to have a crush on you," he said suddenly, then chuckled. "When we were 16, you were the only one who ever talked to me like I wasn't invisible." I laughed, genuinely, for the first time in weeks. It startled me. "You've always been the quiet one," I said. He shrugged. "Still am, but I listen well." And he did. He didn't offer advice unless I asked for it. He didn't try to fix anything. He just became a steady presence, showing up, helping with the kids, distracting my father with stories from his deployments. He even brought over an old Xbox and introduced my son to video games, which became their nightly tradition. It wasn't romantic, not yet. It was something softer, something slower, a kind of intimacy built on trust, not desire. And after everything I'd lost, that felt like a miracle. One night, Dylan confessed he'd always felt Ava was off. He didn't go into details. He just said that she had a way of manipulating people to fit into the version of reality she wanted to believe in, that she always needed to be the center of the story, and that now, seeing the damage she'd caused, he wasn't sure he'd ever be able to look at her the same way again. It didn't make me feel vindicated. It made me feel sad, because Ava had been the closest thing I had to a sister. And now she was a stranger. As the weeks passed, the legal situation began to solidify. My lawyer was confident we'd get full custody. Logan was attending court-ordered anger management, and though he was now cooperating, I didn't trust him. He was allowed supervised visitation twice a week at a local facility. The kids never asked to see him. They never cried for him. They never asked when he was coming home. That silence hurt more than anything. But I understood it. Kids may not understand betrayal the way adults do, but they know when love becomes dangerous. Meanwhile, Ava's behavior continued to spiral. She created fake social media accounts to harass me. She left voicemails in the middle of the night. At one point, she even mailed me a letter with photos of her and Logan from years ago, as if trying to prove something that had long stopped mattering. I handed it all to my lawyer. At night, when the house was quiet, I'd lie awake with my hand on my stomach, whispering to the baby growing inside me. I told him stories about strength, about the kind of man I hoped he'd become, about how he'd be born into a world where his mother had finally learned to choose herself. And for the first time, I started to believe in that future. Not the life I lost, but the one I was still building. One where love would no longer come cloaked in lies. One where silence wouldn't mean secrets. One where I could raise my children in truth, even if that truth was sometimes painful. Because that kind of life, that kind of honesty, that's a foundation no one can tear down. The morning I gave birth was quiet. There was no dramatic water breaking, no frantic rush to the hospital. Just a soft ache that rolled through my back as I stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing blueberries for my daughter's breakfast. I paused for a moment, placing one hand on the counter and the other on the gentle swell of my belly. He kicked back, strong, steady, as if reminding me that he was ready. I had packed the hospital bag a week earlier. Dylan had triple-checked it. The kids were at my dad's house with Renee and Angie, both of whom had insisted on spending the weekend with him so I wouldn't have to worry. I called the hospital, took a shower, and rode in silence to the delivery ward. I didn't tell Logan. I'd sent him updates throughout the pregnancy. Out of courtesy, not obligation. He rarely replied, and when he did, it was short, detached. I hadn't heard from him in over 3 weeks. The last message I'd sent, a photo of our baby's last ultrasound, was left unread. It was better this way. Labor was intense, but mercifully quick. And when the doctor placed my son in my arms, the world fell into silence again. This time, not the empty kind, but the kind that feels sacred. Sacred because it was the first moment of his life, and somehow, the first moment I felt truly new in mine. I named him Elliot James, after my father. He was premature by a few days, small but strong, and he came into the world with a quiet, curious cry. Angie held my hand during delivery, while Dylan waited outside with coffee and a teddy bear he had picked out weeks ago. That night, while Elliot slept beside me in the little bassinet, I cried harder than I had since everything started. It wasn't sadness, not exactly. It was grief and joy tangled together. A birth and a death, in the same breath. My marriage had ended. My father had passed. My heart had been broken in places I hadn't known existed. And yet here was this child, whole and healthy, breathing against the backdrop of it all. When we came home, Angie and Renee took shifts staying with me for the first 6 weeks. I insisted they didn't need to. But they never listened. They cooked, cleaned, took the kids to school, and reminded me every single day that I wasn't alone. Elliot barely cried. He slept on my chest like he was born knowing I needed the silence, the peace. The older kids adored him. My daughter would hum lullabies she made up on the spot, and my son took to being a big brother with pride I hadn't seen in him before. Logan didn't reach out. Not once. No phone call, no message, nothing. Eventually, I stopped checking my phone for his name, and I let my lawyer know we would pursue the legal route to terminate parental rights. He wasn't showing up. He wasn't even trying. And I couldn't let my children keep wondering when he might. I expected that to be the end of it, until Ava came back. I hadn't seen or heard from Ava since she tried to pick my son up from school. We had the emergency restraining order in place. I assumed she would fade into the background, another scar I'd learned to forget. But trauma doesn't always disappear quietly. She broke into my home one afternoon while I was at the park with the kids. I had kept my doors locked religiously, but somehow she had a key. One from childhood, probably, back when she had free reign of my house, and we treated each other's homes like our own. I came back to find drawers open, photos missing, and a strange perfume lingering in the hallway. I called the police. She was arrested 2 hours later outside a gas station, sitting in her car with a framed photo of me, Logan, and the kids from 3 years ago in the passenger seat. When questioned, she claimed she just needed closure. There was no closure left to give. After the arrest, my lawyer filed for a permanent restraining order. We were granted a 7-year order due to the emotional and physical risks she had posed. It wasn't forever, but it was enough. For now. That week, Dylan moved in. It wasn't dramatic or romantic. He just started sleeping over more often to help with nighttime feeds, then stayed longer, then began leaving toothbrushes, coffee mugs, spare t-shirts folded into drawers. One day, the kids asked if he lived with us now, and I realized I didn't have an answer that didn't sound like yes. So yes, he was home. We didn't rush anything beyond that. There was still healing to do. I was still in therapy, still unraveling the knots Logan and Ava had tied inside me. I still had nights where I woke up in a panic, afraid someone would take my children from me, afraid I'd fall for the wrong person again. But Dylan never made me feel rushed, or owed, or even obligated. He simply loved the kids, genuinely. He Took my son to the science museum every other Saturday. He read bedtime stories in funny voices. He cleaned up after dinner without being asked. He held Elliot while I showered, while I cried, while I stood in the hallway some nights just trying to remember how to breathe. He never called himself their dad. He never tried to replace anything. But one evening, as we sat watching a movie, with all 3 kids curled between us, my daughter looked up and asked, "Can we call you Pops?" He didn't cry then, but I did, because it was real. Not forced, not manipulated, just honest. One day, maybe I'll say yes when Dylan asks me to. Marry him. I don't know when that will be, he hasn't asked yet, but I see it in his eyes sometimes, when he watches me dance with Elliot in the kitchen, or when I fall asleep beside him while he holds the baby monitor close. He loves us. He never says it too often, but he shows it every single day, and slowly, the house that had been filled with ghosts became full of laughter again. I went back to work part-time as a nurse, a job I had loved before life tried to convince me I couldn't have both purpose and peace. Renee and Angie watched the kids. Elliot started rolling over early. My older kids thrived in school. They talked about their dad less and less. And when they did, it wasn't with sadness. Just curiosity, we answered gently, honestly, with love, but always with boundaries. I told them the truth in age-appropriate ways, that sometimes grown-ups make bad choices, that love can hurt, but healing is possible. That family is who shows up, who stays, who keeps loving you when it's hard. I look at my life now, nearly a year after everything began to fall apart, and I hardly recognize the version of me that started this story. She was strong, but afraid. I'm still afraid sometimes. But I'm no longer stuck in fear. I move with it, through it. My journal, the one I started the morning I found that first text from Ava, is now over 300 pages long. Someday, maybe I'll publish it. Maybe it'll become the book I never planned to write. A roadmap for women who think they can't survive betrayal. Who think the life they lost is the only one that ever mattered. It isn't. You can survive. You can rebuild. You can love again. Even if it's not romantic. Even if it's just learning to love yourself in a way you never had before. The storm didn't break me. It cleared the path for something better. Something truer. Something I never would have found if I had stayed loyal to people who were never loyal to me. Logan now lives in another state, from what I hear. His new wife is pregnant. We have no contact, no child support, no phone calls, no birthday cards, nothing. And the strangest part? I don't miss him, not even a little. The sun still rises, and I do too, every single day. This story began with a text message, a single line of betrayal that cracked open the illusion of a perfect life. Hannah was a devoted wife, a nurturing mother, and a loving daughter navigating the final stages of her father's life. She had surrounded herself with family, with love, with trust. She gave everything, and expected only loyalty in return. But what she received was deception from the 2 people she loved most after her children, her husband, Logan, and her best friend, Ava. Their affair wasn't just a betrayal of love. It was a theft of security, of safety, of years of memories and milestones. Logan was her rock during her father's decline, or so she thought. Ava, the friend she'd known since childhood, was her lifeline. But behind her back, they were rewriting the script of her life, as if her grief made her invisible, as if her pregnancy made her disposable. When the truth unraveled, it didn't happen in an explosion. It came in the form of stillness, of eerie clarity, of calculated steps. Hannah didn't scream or break things. She didn't beg or crumble. Instead, she stood taller. She gathered evidence. She protected her children. She told the truth. And when she did, the fallout was swift. and brutal. She lost not only her husband and best friend, but a part of herself. The innocent part. The version of her that believed love alone could protect her from harm. The woman who once believed that loyalty was always reciprocal. But in their absence, she found something unexpected. Support from those she hadn't known would stand with her. Her mother-in-law Renee, Ava's own mother Angie, and Dylan, Ava's estranged brother, who became not just a helper, but a quiet, consistent presence. In her healing, she found unexpected stability in the chaos, and slowly, she began to piece her life back together. Not to reclaim the old one, but to build something entirely new. Through court hearings, protective orders, and emotional scars, she gave birth to her third child, Elliot James. A child she welcomed into the world not as a symbol of what had been lost, but as a beacon of what was still possible. In him, she found a new center, a new reason to rise each day. Logan never came back. Ava spiraled further into instability. But Hannah? She flourished. She didn't need vengeance. She didn't need to prove her worth. She simply kept going, in time. Dylan became more than a friend. He became a partner, not because she needed rescuing, but because he stood beside her without demanding anything in return. Together, they created a home not built on fantasy, but on mutual respect, love for the children, and shared values of gentleness and presence. Today, Hannah isn't just surviving. She's thriving. She's raising her children in a home filled with light and laughter. She's working again, using her story not as a wound, but as a testament, a reminder that even the most shattered lives can be rebuilt if the foundation is truth. And that is where the lesson lives. The takeaway. This story is not just about betrayal, it's about the power of choice. Hannah chose herself. She chose not to beg, not to compromise her dignity, not to retaliate with hate. She chose peace. She chose to protect her children with grace, to heal through community, and to love again, on her own terms. So what can we learn from her journey? First, betrayal doesn't define you. Your response does. You can be shattered and still be strong. You can lose everything you thought you needed, only to discover what you actually deserved. Pain doesn't get the final say. Your healing does. Second, not everyone who walks with you is walking for you. Trust your instincts. And when you realize someone no longer values your presence, remove your permission for them to stay. Lastly, you are allowed to start over, at any age, in any season, even after your world has been turned upside down, especially after that. Hannah's story reminds us that endings are not always tragedies. Sometimes they are invitations to become someone wiser, stronger, and freer than we ever thought possible. Now it's your turn to reflect. Interactive question. If you were in Hannah's position, what would you have done after discovering the betrayal? A. Walk away immediately, no explanation. B. Confront them first, then decide based on their reaction. Drop your answer in the comments, A or B, and let us know why. Your insight could be the clarity someone else needs right now, and we'd love to hear from you. What's your personal takeaway from Hannah's journey? Have you been in a similar situation or supported someone who has? Comment below and share your story, your thoughts, or simply a message of support for others going through the same thing. If this story moved you, if it made you feel less alone, or even just opened your eyes a little wider, please subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us create more stories that matter, that heal, that connect us. There's more to come. Until next time, be kind to yourself. You are stronger than you think.